Chair. How are you?
Oh, great. Let's go.
Good afternoon. This is a City Planning Commission special meeting held in New York City Planning Commission Hearing Room, Lower Concourse 120 Broadway. Today is Monday, April 22nd, 2019. I will now call the roll. Chair Lago.
Here.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
Here.
Commissioner Burney. Commissioner Capelli.
Here.
Commissioner Cirillo.
Here.
Commissioner De La Uz. Commissioner Dweck.
Here.
Commissioner Edie.
Here.
Commissioner Knight.
Here.
Commissioner Levin.
Here.
Commissioner Marin.
Here.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Here.
Commissioner Rampashad.
Here.
A quorum is present. Let's turn to page 1 of the calendar. The reports, Borough of Staten Island, calendar numbers 1 through 6. CD1, calendar number 1C190113ZMR. Calendar number 2 has been withdrawn. Calendar number 3, N190114AZRR. Calendar number 4, C190115PPR. Calendar number 5 has been withdrawn. Calendar number 6, N190179AHAR. In the matter of applications for zoning map and zoning text amendments, UDAP designation, project approval, and disposition of city-owned property concerning the special Bay Street Corridor District for favorable reports on calendars numbers 1, 3, 4, and 6. Chair Lago.
I'd like to make a few remarks before casting my vote. The Bay Street Corridor Neighborhood Plan is the result of nearly 4 years of hard work by local residents, business owners, community groups, and an advisory group who dedicated countless hours to help shape the plan. In particular, I'd like to commend the leadership of Councilmember Debbie Rose, who has been a staunch advocate for this community, ensuring that their voices have been heard. And while I'm disappointed that he remains opposed to the plan, I nonetheless want to acknowledge Borough President Otto's tireless advocacy for the future of the North Shore. I'm pleased that the Bay Street Corridor Neighborhood Plan is more than just a rezoning. It's a vision for a future community that provides new affordable housing options and allows residents to live, work, play, shop, dine, and enjoy the arts, all within walking, biking, or public transit distance of their homes. The plan is the result of the expertise and efforts of myriad city agencies, including HPD, DOT, Parks, EDC, SBS, DEP, DOHMH, and SCA. I thank them all. Within the Department of City Planning, numerous divisions have been invaluable to developing and refining the plan, including environmental assessment and review, technical review, land use review, urban design, zoning, capital planning, council, housing, economic and infrastructure planning, and studies implementation. Last, but most decidedly not least, I want to commend the work of our Staten Island office under the leadership of Chris Hadwin. In the earlier stages of this process, Chris was actually the project manager for the Bay Street Corridor Initiative. And even as he was promoted twice, he maintained his commitment to this neighborhood. And I especially want to commend the current project manager, our senior planner and urban designer, Joe Helferty. Joe has consistently brought his unparalleled passion and local knowledge to the process. He's simultaneously been an advocate for the community and for good urban design. Joe's contributions have resulted in the thoughtful zoning framework before us that has a distinctly made in Staten Island feel. I recognize that there continue to be concerns about facets of the neighborhood plan and the rezoning that is before us, most particularly with respect to housing affordability and infrastructure needs. I'm confident that many of these issues, some of which extend beyond the rezoning actions before the Commission, will be addressed in ongoing discussions leading up to the City Council vote. And as importantly, as we recently heard from the department's Jerome Avenue team, these conversations continue long after a rezoning has been adopted. And so I certainly hope that the department will have the opportunity a year or so after the rezoning has been finally adopted to present an update on progress in the actual implementation of the neighborhood plan. And with that, I vote yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Capelli.
Well, I would say that while I agree with much of what Chairwoman Lago has said, that this is the culmination of probably 40 years worth of effort on the part of people, because I got involved in this particular issue as the land use chairman of Community Board 1 back in the late 70s. And much of what we are seeing today, I know that government moves slowly, but 40 years, we finally got there. I support the vision that is being laid out here. Nearly 20 years ago, when the city planning downzoned much of Staten Island, I was one of the few people to oppose that downzoning that took place at that time. I believe then, as I do now, that in order for us to be able to house people in this city, we need to create density in places where there are accessible public transit. And this is probably one of the only neighborhoods in Staten Island that has decent public transit because of its proximity to the ferry and its proximity to the North Shore line, as well as numerous bus services. So I believe it's an entirely appropriate site to be looking at creating a mixed-use community such as this is at. I would agree with the notion that the councilwoman from the area has provided a lot of leadership on this issue. And I also agree with the idea that the borough president, who I have tremendous respect for as a nuts and bolts guy, who really rolls up his sleeve and gets involved in these things, has also offered very intelligent and creative insight as to what should be occurring at this site. I'm a little saddened, but the process doesn't provide borough presidents greater statutory influence. And in fact, about a month ago, I testified before the Charter Commission on a number of topics, including increasing the roles of the borough president in the areas of service delivery within the communities and in the land use process, because as an executive agency official, I think that we threw too much out with the charter revisions that took place after the elimination of the Board of Estimate. And I think that borough presidents like them, actually like virtually all of the borough presidents we have today, can and should be playing a greater role in a formalized sense and in the uniform land use review procedure. This is, as the chair pointed out, a vision. There's a lot that still needs to take place in this. I've had multiple conversations with numerous parties who are involved in looking at this from an agency and from an executive perspective. I know that a lot will change in this, that there'll be more meat on the bones of the skeleton as it finally comes to adoption at the City Council through the Council's leadership. And I'm very hopeful that that will make this a much more exciting project to support. And I would urge you to support this project because the need for both affordable housing on Staten Island for the elderly, for people who are not in the higher socioeconomic means in a beautiful location are very desirable. As these other amenities come forward, and hopefully in the future, when we create the density along this route, which will include not just this project, but hopefully the second leg of Irby, which will add many more residents to it, will have greater density that maybe I can get my fast ferry out of Stapleton into Brooklyn when we were able to show that we've got the fannies to put in the seats, as they say. So with that, I am voting yes to support this, and thank you for your time.
Commissioner Cirillo.
So, I recall when this application was first certified that I said that the rezoning of the Bay Street corridor was likely the first and most significant zoning for growth proposal to be considered for Staten Island since the establishment of the 1961 zoning resolution. What that means, of course, is that due to its significance, it really has to be done right. So the threshold question becomes, how do you define right? But before I speak to that issue, I do have to acknowledge a few things. First, Madam Chair, Chris and Joe and the rest of the department's team for your communication with me and the post-hearing follow-up information and answers you were able to provide. It's very much appreciated. And to my colleagues who have given great thought to this application and provided insight and suggestions throughout the process, I thank you for that, and I know that the people of Staten Island thank you for that too. But most of all, I want to thank the members of the Staten Island community who took the time to come to Lower Manhattan, both for and against, both hopeful and reluctant, to share their points of view about housing and jobs, public space, and traffic and infrastructure. The moments when the public speaks to us are the most rewarding part of sitting on this dais, and I know we all share that feeling. So while a part of the mayor's neighborhood rezoning plan, this rezoning proposal was one that was enthusiastically awaited, not merely for the one neighborhood it was based in, but for all the neighborhoods across Staten Island that saw the opportunity to, despite what the DEIS stated, create a new neighborhood where one did not previously exist. A neighborhood with a new as-of-right built character unknown in this otherwise low-scale, primarily unregulated, suburban-style borough. A neighborhood that would be in demand by those living all across the borough and throughout the other 4 boroughs and beyond. And for those who welcome diversity at every level and who want proximity to the economic engine of our region, state, and country via a free commute and on an iconic ferry system, and who love the water and an equally iconic skyline. So while hosted in one neighborhood, it wasn't about one neighborhood. It was about creating a lifestyle that, while common around our city, was a new way of life for the residents of Richmond County. And that is why I also have to acknowledge the administration and this department and HPD for the formulation of the housing plan's affordability component that takes advantage of all the income band options that the zoning text provides for. There is no question that providing that level of range in this proposal goes a long way to supporting the goals of building a diverse new neighborhood open to all. But this application and the discussion around it has to be put into context with the backdrop of the island's history of development, something some have called the Wild, Wild West, a history, irrational residential density, and deteriorated quality of life emanating from bad decisions, a lack of vision on planning, and absent or overtaxed infrastructure. This fact matters because it causes us to have to raise the bar on how we build new neighborhoods in the borough. And so we are back to, how do you define getting it right? Most of all, it's about understanding the impacts. This proposal, while independent of any other, is just one piece of a changing geography. In addition to this Bay Street corridor rezoning proposal, the Stapleton Special District rezoning, which we know as the Front Street redevelopment, and the St. George Special District rezoning from several years ago, which is still simmering and not even been a thought in this discussion, are 2 huge rezonings that we have yet to see the impacts of, and likely these 3 rezonings will begin to recraft the North Shore at the same time. 3,000 units here, 3,000 units there, 900 units over here. The numbers are huge. And the potential population growth in one area unprecedented. Could it ultimately hit 10,000? Therefore, the questions posed by this commission, the borough president, civic groups, and the community board, and also just unaffiliated concerned residents are all relevant and deserve response. But unfortunately, too many of these questions remain unanswered. And all of the questions relate to infrastructure. The one critical issue that I raised at certification, the one the borough president has raised throughout, and the community raised during public hearing. And while there is much to say on this issue alone, let's look briefly at where we are. DEP says we're good, even though approximately 2 years ago they told a small hotel developer in this area he needed to deal with the sewer system infrastructure because the current system couldn't handle the new development. But today, thousands of units and people introduced to the system, and there's no problem. Health and public safety, police and fire, two of the most important areas of focus, while not even appearing at the hearing to address issues or concern, are also all good, despite the introduction of thousands of units and people. And as Commissioner Levin pointed out from her work on the Hudson Yards rezoning, no future site has been identified for this area for a precinct or a firehouse for the future to ensure we can accommodate those needs. Our finest, our bravest, and our residents deserve better. Schools. North Shore schools at its earliest years of education are already over capacity, and even the EIS recognizes that. And while there is a spot for a school identified in the Stapleton Special District modifications, it is not identified as a New York City public school, and there's no commitment to actually build it. The MTA. Another no-show at the hearing, although all the reasons new higher density development is justified in this area is because it is allegedly transit rich. While I'm not sure I agree with that, I do agree that it's true that any transit option is within the MTA's jurisdiction, and there's been no input by them. And well, DOT. The city has no plan to address the traffic and transit situations that will be worsened by this proposal at this time. This week, an article I read provided information that a traffic study would be done at some point in the future to come up with a plan in the future. It'll be discussed when this gets to the council. But where do we fit in? Aren't we the planners? Shouldn't we be analyzing these plans to ensure that these decisions that shape neighborhoods make sense? All we as a commission have seen in new commitments or responses to concerns raised are some public realm improvements in the corridor, which, while certainly welcomed by the community, are improvements the existing community who has called this area home for years deserve, but not merely because of the rezoning. So how do we get this right? I'm just not sure it's like this. The borough president's questions and conditions were particularly ignored in the process, even though he was publicly commended for the thoughtfulness and reasonableness in crafting them. Even the simplest of asks, sewer projects, surveys, plans and studies, roadway realignments, the basic of requests, easy for the city to commit to, were met with either no response or punted to be dealt with at the council. I can't imagine that if this were a private application and reasonable conditions went without addressing or further discussion, we wouldn't be holding that applicant's feet to the fire with the threat of rejection. But here, we seem focused on awaiting the role the council will play. And while I, as a former member of the council, understand and respect the critical role the charter bestows upon the council, I nevertheless believe that we as a commission should still be more effective a participant in this important process. And again, if a private applicant were to say to us, and we know they have, and we know we have not liked it, don't worry, commissioners, we'll handle those issues when we get to the council, I don't think the applicant would get very far beyond this room. So I'm not sure why in this process the city should be able to treat us with any less respect than we would tolerate from the private sector. Perhaps this will become the perfect application with all outstanding issues resolved and all plans in place to ensure and assure the community of its promising future. I, without a doubt, was so hoping for that when this process started, and I look so forward to being a part of that future. It is clearly an area of the borough long overdue for revitalization and renewal, but also one long overdue for respect. So with what we know today and what we don't know, in a perfect world, we would start all over. Not unlike my other favorite community, Greater East Midtown, which saw a far improved and community beneficial proposal in its second life than it did in its first. It can happen. But for now, in the time we've been given, the role we play in this process, and based on the missed opportunity to, at this important point in the land use review process, to deliver real answers and assurances to us and to the community, I have to vote no. Thank you.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yes.
Commissioner Edie.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
I certainly share the observations of Commissioners Capelli and Cerullo that there is much work that needs to be done on this proposal to get it right. It is striking that we have much less information about the additional commitments the city will make to this area in order to make this rezoning successful. But on the land use side of things, I too support the vision of the plan and believe that the best course after 40 years of working on this is to let it go forward from here with the urgent plea that the negotiations at the City Council make it better and better. I vote yes.
Commissioner Marin.
I concur with the observations and comments made by Commissioner Cerullo. My vote is no.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
Commissioner Rampashad.
I too concur with the comments Commissioner Cerullo made, and I'm going to vote no.
Favorable reports have been adopted on calendar numbers 1, 3, 4, and 6. Commissioner Chair.
And I guess there is no more business before the meeting, and
There's not. This concludes the special meeting for Monday, April 22nd, 2019. Okay. Now, this begins the City Planning Commission review session for Monday, April 22nd, 2019. The time is 1:23. Our first item on our agenda is a certification of an acquisition and zoning text amendments in Manhattan Community Districts 3 and 6. Our presenter is Matthew Pietris.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is a city application by the New York City Departments of Transportation, Citywide Administrative Services, Environmental Protection, and Small Business Services for acquisitions of real property and a zoning text amendment to facilitate the development of the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project. The project is located in Manhattan Community Districts 3 and 6. On the south, the proposed project begins in the Lower East Side of Montgomery Street and ends in the north in Kips Bay at East 25th Street. The project is in response to flood vulnerability made evident by Hurricane Sandy in 2012. After Sandy, the city began to study coastal resiliency, published Plan NYC, and launched Rebuild by Design in conjunction with HUD to solicit ideas for coastal protection. In 2014, the Big U was announced the winner of the competition. The city then included this project in One NYC, and design has been ongoing since 2015. The proposed project is one component, or one compartment of the Big U design. The surrounding area contains multifamily elevator buildings, public parks, utility and public institutions, mainly Con Edison and the VA Medical Center. It also contains a number of multifamily elevator buildings, a number of which can be seen here. The design of the project uses the following criteria as a baseline. It's 100-year FEMA flood elevation plus storm wave height plus 90th percentile sea level rise, which gives us a design flood elevation of 16.5 feet. To protect against this sea level, flood protection system contains a series of flood walls, closure structures or floodgates, sewer improvements, and park improvements. Before going into the requested land use actions, I'm going to walk through an overview of the project. The majority of the project is within city-owned land and map beds of street, but some portions are on private land. Beginning in the south to the left of your screen, the project begins at Montgomery Street. This section contains several flood walls and floodgates, including the southern tieback at Montgomery Street. On the top left of your screen is Gouverneur Gardens. Here, the flood protection system starts on the corner of Montgomery and South Streets as a flood wall. It then crosses across South Street as a deployable floodgate and crosses under the FDR. In the bottom right is Pier 42. Here, the flood protection system continues adjacent to the FDR until East River Park. The alignment of the flood protection system is seen in pink, and this will come up throughout the presentation. The next section is within East River Park. The image on the top shows the existing conditions within the park. At roughly 8 feet in elevation, the entire park would flood during the design storm event. The proposed project proposes to raise the elevation of the park between 8 and 9 feet to exceed the elevation of the design flood event, which you can see at the bottom of the screen. This is a rendering of the southern section of the park. All programmatic elements within the existing park will be upgraded in the proposed project, including the amphitheater, which is at the bottom of the screen, the playfield in the middle, and passive recreation spaces south of Williamsburg Bridge. The next section is this is the middle section of the park between Williamsburg Bridge and East Houston Street. Here we can see upgraded tennis courts north of Williamsburg Bridge, playfield in the middle, and passive recreation spaces, and then more ball fields at the north end of the screen. The northern section of the park also contains passive and active recreation spaces. In these images, we zoom into the track and field, which is at the northern section of the park. On the left, we see the proposed raised park during a non-storm event. Here, the park is elevated with an upgraded track and field. Most of the esplanade here is raised, but to continue to allow access to the water, there is a step-down esplanade, which you can see in the blue elements just left of the track on the left. On the right, we see the park during the design storm event. As we can see, the raised park is protected from storm surge and waves. The step-down esplanade does flood, but the remainder of the park does remain protected. North of the park, the flood protection system continues with a series of flood walls and floodgates and a flyover bridge, which addresses a pinch point of circulation adjacent to the FDR at roughly 14th Street. Here we can see a number of floodgates and flood walls that extend north along the to the Con Edison facilities. Here the system crosses the FDR as a floodgate and extends north as a flood wall from Rees houses to Con Edison's generating facility. The generating station has flood protection incorporated into the building. The system will have a watertight connection here at the north and south of the building. North of the facility, the flood wall continues along Con Edison's parking lot to Murphy Brothers Playground. Here, the proposed changes include upgraded t-ball fields, a new building pad for a future comfort station, basketball court, and playground. The playground will also integrate landscaping with the proposed flood wall. At Avenue C, the system crosses under the FDR into Stuyvesant Cove Park. This brings us to the next section of the park, or the flood protection system. The proposed changes in Sty Cove Park include a series of flood walls, floodgates, landscaping, and more resilient planting to seawater. The system then continues to Astor Levy and the VA Medical Center at the northern end. Here, the proposed changes include a flood wall and floodgate that tie into the existing flood wall at the VA Medical Center. Other changes include more resilient play equipment and plantings similar to those at Stuyvesant Cove Park. In addition to park improvements, flood walls, and closure structures, upgrades to the sewer system are included in the proposed project. The dark blue line, labeled here the interceptor line, is a 9-foot in diameter sewer, which brings combined sewage to the Manhattan Pump Station, which then sends the water to Newtown Creek to the water treatment plant. To increase capacity of existing sewers, there are also a series of parallel conveyance or shortcut sewers included in the project. There are also interceptor gatehouses, which will close in the design storm event to prevent the bathtub effect or flooding from behind the system. This is a diagram of the proposed system. Currently, existing sewers often reach capacity during regular rain events, and the combined sewage discharges into outfalls into the East River. By opening the proposed parallel conveyance sewers, stormwater will travel more easily to the interceptor line, reducing the amount of sewage discharged into the river as a result. The interceptor gatehouses, which will be activated during storm events, are above-ground structures. These buildings house mechanical equipment and the controls necessary to maintain and close the system, which is underground. These are proposed to be placed in the map bed of streets adjacent to Corlier's Hook Park and on the median of East 20th Street. With that overview of the project, we're going to move into a summary of the land use actions requested. These include 8 acquisitions of real property and a text amendment. The first acquisition is related to the proposed drainage modifications at East River Houses. The proposed acquisition area is seen here in red and will allow the city access to operate, inspect, and maintain the proposed sewer upgrades, which are located underground. The next acquisition is also related to parallel conveyance. At Neitsch's Baruch houses, the city would require access to maintain, operate, and inspect the underground sewer improvements at the corner of Columbia and Houston Streets. That area is seen here in red. The next acquisition is at Gouverneur Gardens. Here, the city proposes building a flood wall on the map bed of street, seen here. Directly behind the wall is Gouverneur Gardens property. To maintain the flood wall, the city requires access to Gouverneur Gardens lot. In addition to access, the acquisition would prohibit the planting of deep-rooted trees, as these could damage the flood wall and compromise the system. Similarly, the next acquisition is for a flood wall at Neitsch's Jacob Rees houses. Like Gouverneur Gardens, the flood wall will run adjacent to Rees houses on the map bed of street. On Rees House's property, the city requires access to maintain and inspect the flood wall. Here, an existing fence and 1 street tree would need to be removed to accommodate the flood wall. Following the flood wall north, the next acquisition is at the Con Ed generating station. Here, the acquisition would allow the city access to the interior of the generating station to operate, maintain, and repair the existing flood protection system that is integrated within the building. It would also allow the city access to maintain, inspect, and operate the watertight connections at the north and south of the building. On the north side of the generating station, the city requests an acquisition to maintain the flood wall system adjacent to Con Edison's parking lot. Here we can see the flood protection system as a series of flood walls and floodgates in the map bed of street. The approximate location of the acquisition area is seen here in red. The city requires access to maintain, operate, and inspect the system from within Con Ed's parking lot. Parking would only be interrupted when the wall requires maintenance. Otherwise, the spots will remain. The next acquisition is for access at the VA Medical Center at the northern end of the system. Here, the system ties into the existing flood protection system at the VA Medical Center from Asser-Levy Park. While no acquisition is needed to maintain the proposed flood protection from within Asser-Levy, the city requests to acquire a portion of the VA Medical Center's lot to maintain the existing flood protection system and the proposed watertight connection to it. The last acquisition is from the New York State Department of Transportation to construct the proposed flyover bridge. The proposed flyover bridge, which would address a pinch point along the East River Greenway, where the width of the path decreases to about 30 inches at its narrowest. While the bridge is still very early in design, the approximate alignment is shown here in orange. The proposed bridge would begin at the north end of East River Park and land in Captain Patrick Brown Walk, which is owned by the New York State Department of Transportation. Here, the city requests an acquisition for a portion of the mapped FDR, where the footings of the bridge would land. That area is shown here in red. In addition to acquisitions of real property, the city requests a text amendment that would waive the design and visual corridors requirements of the zoning resolution for waterfront lots. If the project were to achieve full compliance with the waterfront regulations, it could compromise the effectiveness of the entire system. By allowing design flexibility, the proposed project could provide essential flood protection for upland areas. Shown here is the proposed design of Stuyvesant Cove Park. The first waiver is in response to the requirement that an additional visual corridor be added where streets connecting to the waterfront are more than 600 feet apart. Shown in red, the distance between East 20th and East 23rd Streets is 850 feet, and no additional visual corridor is proposed. Next, waterfront regulations require visual corridors be no less than 50 feet. Pardon me. The proposed corridor at East 20th Street is 30 feet wide. Of course, during a flood event, the floodgates at each corridor will be closed and there will be no visual corridors. Waterfront regulations also require minimum widths of upland connections to be at least 30 feet wide. Shown in red, portions of the East 20th Street connection will be less than 30 feet wide, and the East 23rd Street as well. Oh, I'm sorry, not 30 feet. It's about 36 feet with the design regulations, and neither of these will comply with that. Finally, the zoning resolution specifies the maximum heights of fences shall be no higher than 36 inches and walls no higher than 21 inches. To meet the design criteria and the design flood elevation of 16.5 feet, flood walls and floodgates will be approximately 8 feet above grade. To summarize, the applicants seek 8 acquisitions of real property and a text amendment to ensure that the flood protection system remains operational and effective. The locations of those actions are shown here. The draft environmental impact statement includes a detailed analysis of 14 categories. The analysis found no impacts in 12 categories and found the potential for significant adverse impact in 2 categories. Between the draft and final environmental impact statement, the city will explore measures to mitigate these potential impacts. In summary, the city requests acquisitions of real property and text amendment to facilitate the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project. Happy to take any questions.
Questions? Vice Chair Knuckles.
Approximately how long will it take to implement the build-out of this infrastructure?
Currently, the whole design is 2023, with construction starting next year.
Well, do you know whether or not there'd be street closures, et cetera, for?
There is, as part of the construction impacts, there is a transportation impact at 23rd and 1st Ave between 6 and 7 a.m. and 23rd and Avenue C between 6 and 7 a.m. The new park design allows a lot of the construction to be done from barges, and so street closures will be lessened than the original design.
Thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi, good morning. I know the previous plan did not envision a full closure of the park in the same way. Could you speak to what's anticipated with respect to park closures and the impact on nearby residents where they could go in the meantime?
Sure. So we can definitely have parks look into that more, but right now the entire park will be closed during construction, but the city is continuing to look at ways to mitigate that, and if there could be a phased opening, but that's still unsure at the moment.
So how long are we looking at a closure?
It would be, for East River Park, it would be during the entire construction period currently, which would be 2020 to 2023.
Okay, so 3 years.
3 years.
I also noticed there's no mention of NYC Ferry in our briefing material or just even in a description of the surrounding area and context. And there are 2 ferry landings within the park area. What happens to those ferry landings? Corliers is not mentioned, for instance, and I think the ridership there is fairly low. Mm-hmm. Is it anticipated that those would go away? I know there's a bigger question around ferries in the city in general, but how is that perceived within this plan?
As part of the project, the ferries would remain, and especially during construction at Stuyvesant Cove Park too, that ferry would remain operational.
So the ferry at Stuyvesant Cove would remain operational?
Neither of the ferries would be inoperable during construction, and there's no proposed changes as part of this project to move those.
Okay, but I'm not sure I understand. If the park is closed, how do you get to the ferries?
That's still being worked out currently, but the actual stops will remain. Stuyvesant Cove Park may not be closed during the entire construction period, so there's still, the city is currently looking at access to that station. but that hasn't been entirely worked out yet.
Okay, it would be good to have more information on that. Thank you.
Commissioner Levin.
Yeah, I have a whole bunch of questions here, ranging from the cosmic to the mundane, but since it's Earth Day, maybe we start with the cosmic one. And that is, I need help understanding the design criteria and how we know, this all has been in the planning stages for a number of years, during which we have learned an awful lot more about climate change, become much more concerned about the rising hazards. How do we know that the design criteria will remain correct and effective, and that we're not building something that's only half of what it turns out we really need?
Sure. So this does take into account, as we can see here, this is the different elevations as part of the design criteria. So the total design elevation is 16.5 feet. That's half a foot higher than what's required by the federal regulations. But so we have a 100-year flood requirement in 13.5 feet. Then there's the FEMA 100-year flood plus freeboard wave requirement, which brings us up to 16 feet. And then there's a half a foot for contingency. So this is a more conservative with levels of sea rise, with storm wave. All of these are a lot higher. And these are with current projections. So if those projections could change, but.
And how recent are those projections, and how solid is the FEMA 100-year flood calculations? Is that, are we pretty confident in those numbers now, or are those also subject to
I would say
reconsideration as science improves and the situation gets more dire?
Yeah, so I would say that we are confident in these numbers and these estimates from FEMA. We can definitely have the Office of Resiliency and Recovery speak more to that when it comes back. But this is a more conservative estimate, and so that's what we're working on.
Yeah, I do think, this strikes me, this project strikes me, or this application strikes me as a little bit like the borough-based jails, in that what we're being asked to do is a pretty limited piece of a much bigger and more complex project. But this will probably be the public forum for anyone to discuss anything related to this project, even if it's not exactly what we're going to be looking at and voting on. So I do think it would be helpful to have some further information about these larger contextual questions before we get to the public hearing, or as part of the public hearing.
Absolutely.
But then more sort of focused on what we're doing here. So fundamentally, this involves building a wall, snaking its way along the east side, right?
In parts.
So that communities are going to have a new piece of city infrastructure to deal with. What ongoing community involvement will there be as the physical changes take place, particularly the NYCHA campuses, but anyone along the way? Is there going to be a way for communities to stay well-informed of how the project is unfolding and be consulted when design changes take place?
So yeah, the community, currently DDC is the applicant representative on this, and there's been ongoing nearly weekly or bi-weekly meetings with different communities. So as the design continues to progress, these communities are involved in that. At the NYCHA campuses, so if we go back here, so at Baruch houses, there's actually going to be no infrastructure that you'll see. That's for parallel conveyance there.
Okay.
So all of that's underground. So it just allows access, the city access to maintain and make sure that system is currently working. And then at Jacob Breeze, there will be an additional, there is a wall at Jacob Breeze. Yeah. And those residents have been and will be.
Yeah, so, and will that continue through the construction process? Or certainly through the design process?
Yes. The current design of the wall is not fully worked out yet. So how that wall will look may change.
Right, and that's the thing that I think the local communities are going to be keenly interested in. So I would really hope that there is an ongoing community consultation.
I assume your question goes to your prior comment, which is the actual actions in front of us are about as plain vanilla as can be, but you're talking about an engagement with respect to the broader project.
Yes, I'm getting into exactly what I'm expecting is not our turf, and that I expect are the kinds of questions that people are going to want to be sure get answered. And, we're the kind of body that can maybe make those things happen, even if it doesn't have to do with exactly what's before us. And then, finally, just for exactly what's before us, the proposed text amendment does seem to me pretty broad. It just basically says whatever you build will be considered satisfactory with respect to waterfront zoning, which I have to say is a little bit awkward phrasing, it seems to me. But I'm also wondering, shouldn't there be some city planning oversight to how these things actually get designed? It's the last paragraph there. Oh, no, wait, it's not.
Maybe the last sentence of the first paragraph?
It's C, yeah. Yeah, the requirements of waterfront zoning shall be deemed satisfied. Well, shouldn't there be a stop back at city planning to show exactly where the differences are between what waterfront zoning would require and what is being proposed? I mean, normally we see some sort of city planning oversight as, as part of, this is essentially a waiver. And we usually, not we, but the Department of City Planning usually maintains some kind of oversight of plans as they actually get laid out. Is that appropriate here?
Yeah, we'll take a look at that, because on the one hand, when the wall is up, it's going to be a complete block, and so we don't want to interfere with that during the flood events. But I hear your broader point about what might make sense with respect to getting between here and the full design.
I would like to add to that as well. So we've used this text is based off of some text that we used previously for the East River Esplanade. And the waivers in this case are a little bit broader than that, because that actually did have a certification if the project changed from the original FEIS, because it was phased for such a long period, that there was an idea that over time, some of the components would no longer be as relevant as they were, a decade earlier.
Happens, yeah.
And so that did have a certification. In this case, we chose not to include the certification, or the city team thought that that was not necessary for a couple of reasons. One, there's no phasing, and this really, upon approval, will come online fairly quickly. And second, PDC has a major role in the design and those more of the beautification components, whereas the work of the commission is more looking at the visual corridors and the upland connections. And so we've been working very closely with PDC on this project, and we felt that really the concerns about the design were in their wheelhouse, and that they could definitely address those as their review continues. But we hear your point, and we'll discuss it with the city team, certainly.
Well, thank you for that.
Sure.
I'll also note that while not formally on the PDC, we do have a senior member of our urban design team who provides input on all applications before PDC and actually attends all of the meetings. So this isn't something new. We have quite a robust relationship.
No, that's helpful. But I think it's worth thinking twice about this, because I do expect, it's a, 4 or 5 year project, and changes may occur, and it would be unfortunate to miss something that city planning should have had a look at, should the design change. Thank you.
Other comments? Commissioner Ramprashad.
Yeah, I too was wondering what the wall looked like, the material, if it's reinforced concrete block. And I was just wondering with regards to the height, you said it's 8 feet?
It varies, but it'll be about 8 feet in areas where the elevation of the, in Stuyvesant Cove will be 8 feet. But around, at Montgomery and South Street, at the tieback, that land is higher there, so the flood wall will actually be lower. It'll taper into where the elevation of the land meets 16.5 feet. The highest that wall gets is about 5 feet.
5 feet, okay. I'm not sure, are they going to put the height in the text? Like in terms of the wall, would it be a maximum height of 8 feet? Is that something that you guys are also looking at? I'm just curious.
No, so
I wouldn't expect that.
No, currently there's no plans to put a maximum height here because the walls are meant to meet this height of the design elevation. And so just to allow for the flexibility, if that wall height needs to change a little bit because they need to excavate a little bit more, we want to keep that flexibility so they can meet that 16.5 feet design criteria.
It's more a performance standard of meeting the design flood, the base flood elevation, or the design flood elevation.
Thank you.
Other comments? Yes, Commissioner Ortiz.
You know, back to sort of the zoning text, and just as we think about some of the provisions here, we talk about open accessible to the public. And I get back to the transportation infrastructure that is there, and that we want to reinforce, and that there really needs to be some recognition of that infrastructure, which, you know, the city is spending quite a bit to develop and maintain. And so I'm not sure if that's something that ends up here or just as a consideration as we think about the design.
Yeah, we certainly don't want the text to conflict with any type of transportation, so we'll look at that.
Commissioner Edie.
Yeah, just a quick question here. I honestly appreciate the work being done here. However, it occurred to me, it's not clear to me what happens to the areas just at the north of this wall, let's call it. What's the impact on those communities, and what would happen if these walls are deployed and there is a surge? What happens to those areas?
Are you referring to any type of spillover if there's any additional flooding?
Exactly.
So there's modeling that is currently being done that shows that there won't be any displacement of water that would have additional impact on these communities outside of the flood protection area. So it wouldn't cause higher flood elevation to the north and south of the system.
Okay. Whatever information you have when we come back would be helpful.
Sure. And I'll also note, too, that the system is kind of the northern end of the flood protection system as part of the Big U, and there's efforts underway further south on the island to address that. So flood protection will then extend from 25th Street eventually and hopefully all the way to the other side of the island at Battery Park City.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
Other comments?
Well,
Commissioner Levin.
sorry, that begs then the question about what is the timing for the other pieces of the Big U?
Sure. So we have...
And what are the other pieces of the Big U?
So there's Battery Park City. We'll start on that side. The Battery Park City Authority is looking into flood resiliency there. They're looking to start construction in 2020. That will be an elevated esplanade. I only have a few details on this, but and then the Battery, moving further south, is New York City EDC with Parks, the Battery Park City Authority, and Battery Construction. That's going to be a similar elevated esplanade with a grassy landscaping that connects upland. Seaport City is, there's currently an active RFQ for design proposals for that, and that's due on May 7th. But right now there's an interim flood protection measure where they're basically going to have these deployable temporary gates that will go up for a 10-year flood to protect it while design's being worked out. And then the last one is the Two Bridges Coastal Resiliency. That's looking to start construction in 2021, and that'll be a series of flood walls and deployable flip structures that will basically be on the esplanade and flip up during flood events. And that's also EDC with DDC as the construction manager.
Thank you for that. Do any of those have implications for the Planning Commission?
Not currently.
Okay.
And we don't anticipate any.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I'll make two observations about the project, knowing that there are some other bicycling enthusiasts. The flyover to get rid of a really obnoxious pinch point will be very welcome. The second thing that I'll note is how pleased I am that this project is protecting so many of our NYCHA campuses, and I do think there is a strong environmental justice facet to this phase of the Big U. And with that, the application is certified.
Thank you.
Okay, the second item on the agenda has been laid over. The third item on the agenda, page 89, is a certification of a zoning map and zoning text amendment in Queens Community District 8. Our presenter is Scott Solomon. Joy, is Scott around? We will track down our errant staff person and do a second call on the Kew Gardens Hills rezoning. Moving on to the fourth item on the agenda, page 117, a certification of a zoning map and zoning text amendments in Queens Community District 1. Our presenter is Joy Chen.
Madam Chair, I'm recused from this matter. Also on 5 and 6 as well. So in case you go consecutively, I'll be in the room.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is a private application by Empire MG Properties, which is seeking a zoning map amendment and zoning text amendment to rezone a portion of Block 645 on 38th Street between 34th and 35th Avenues in an M11 zoning district to an R6A zoning district with a C13 commercial overlay. The applicant also requests a zoning text amendment to designate this project area as a mandatory inclusionary housing area. And these proposed actions are being put forth to facilitate the development of a new 7-story mixed-use building shown in the graphic in front of you with a total of 62 residential units, including 19 affordable units and 80 accessory residential parking spaces. This shows the aerial context of 38th Street between 34th and 35th Avenues in Community District 1 in Astoria, Queens. You'll see it's 1 block away from Steinway Street, which is a major commercial corridor, as well as 1 block away from the Astoria, Kaufman Astoria Studios complex, which is a big cultural institution as well as business anchor in this area, and the Museum of the Moving Image is also on this block. Zooming in a little closer onto Block 645, which is this portion that is being proposed for the rezoning from an existing M11 district to an R6A district with a C13 commercial overlay. This area outlined in the red is the applicant-owned lots. So these are 5 lots that are owned by the applicant today, and they are in currently non-conforming residential uses, and including 1 warehouse use. And the surrounding uses on the other side of Block 645 on 37th Street are also non-conforming residential uses in the M11 district. So today the zoning is constrained by the existing M11 zoning district. The existing land uses here are very mixed, as is typical in this area of Astoria. You have a lot of ground floor commercial uses as well as residential uses in the existing R5 districts to the north. And here is our project area and our development site. These are images showing the street frontage. This is the existing street frontage along 38th Street, and you'll see that we have existing 2-story buildings as well as a lot of community facility uses and cultural institutions on this block. This is this Astoria Sports Complex, which is a longstanding gym in this area. And on the other side of the block, you'll see the 4-story townhouse buildings. This is the tax map showing the lot, block 645, as well as the 27 lots within the rezoning area and the 5 lots owned by the applicant. The proposed zoning is from the M11 district to an R6A zoning district with a C13 commercial overlay. And in terms of its relationship to the changing land use patterns and other actions in this area, about 10 years ago, this portion of the block was changed from an M15 district to a C42A zoning district, which is also an R6A equivalent, to facilitate the development of a residential building very similar to this mixed-use building that is being proposed today. This zoning map change would facilitate a 7-story residential and commercial building or mixed-use building that would be 75 feet tall in height. It would have a 3.6 maximum FAR and also include rooftop recreational area for residents, 62 total residential units, including 19 affordable units, and 1 story of ground floor commercial use. This is the roof plan, which illustrates the proposed new development. And along 38th Street, where there would be entrance to the parking as well. And this is a section showing the 7-story new building, and the cellar and the sub-cellar levels would contain accessory parking. In summary, this zoning map amendment from an M11 district to an R6A zoning district with a C13 commercial overlay is in keeping with the land use trends and development trends in this area of Astoria. It would more accurately reflect these patterns, as well as recognize dozens of non-conforming residential buildings in the rezoning area and permit additional housing capacity. Thank you.
Questions? Commissioner Levin.
Yeah, I have 2 questions about the, well, actually, 2 questions about the zoning, and then I think it's important to carry on the work of Commissioner De La Uz and ask you about affordability in the neighborhood. I noticed that the immediately surrounding areas, is, as you pointed out, is primarily 2 to 4-story residential buildings. Mm-hmm. How are we satisfied that a building of this scale, 7 stories, which is essentially double what's there now, is appropriate from a contextual standpoint?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are, because this block is really kind of centered within this Astoria Kaufman complex, you have existing high lot coverage buildings with it that are 5 stories tall, that are loft and used for film industry uses and other commercial uses. You also have on Steinway Street and a little bit further away north of Steinway Street and 34th Avenue, other multifamily apartment buildings that are elevator buildings more than 4 stories. They're not a lot of them, but there are some. And then this area of Astoria also is very 1 block away from the M and the R subway station, which is shown here. And so the applicant, when we were reviewing this, believed that this block could accommodate the additional density of a 7-story.
Yeah, certainly for proximity to transit, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And then how about the decision to include the commercial overlay? There's not existing commercial on that street at the moment. Why do we think it's appropriate, and how is it anticipated to work?
Mm-hmm. Well, there is not currently any commercial overlay on this street. There is right next door the Astoria Sports Complex, though, which had to have BSA actions in the past to operate as a gym. And then on the corner, there's the Panera Bread, like up on 35th Avenue, where there are existing overlays. And because the applicant wanted to include ground floor commercial uses, they thought we're proposing a C13 would be appropriate as part of their action.
Okay. Well, both of those issues, are really things that the local community's point of view ought to be very influential on. So we'll look forward to hearing what the thoughts are as it comes through.
I would just note on that point that we've been looking at the broader neighborhood, the Steinway Street corridor and surrounding areas, and the council member has been quite supportive of mapping additional commercial overlays.
Okay, well, we'll learn more about the area as we go ahead. But then just my last question, I noticed that the applicant is proposing option 2 for the MIH. Mm-hmm. How does that match area incomes? What is the local?
Yeah, I'm going to check into what the local median income is, but it is a little higher in this area of Astoria, I believe.
Okay, well, we can follow up on that one when it comes back. Thank you.
Commissioner, Vice Chair Knuckles.
Joy, thank you. I was just wondering about the rationale. This is an M1 district with residential areas surrounding it, and then in close proximity are pre-existing, non-conforming residential uses that have been there, obviously, a very long time. What, in your view, tips the decision-making to grant a residential use in this M1 at the end of the day?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, originally this area was very mixed use. You did have very active manufacturing and industrial uses, and then those workers would live next door or would live around those active manufacturing uses. In this case, though, on this block, there really is no active manufacturing use present. There is a warehouse use, a one-story warehouse where they store materials, but it's not actively making anything anymore. And so the trend really here is in facilitating more development that would add additional housing as well as support the new business uses that are moving into this area and facilitate that new trend.
One other thing that I'll note is that one lot is going to be rendered non-conforming, but 20 are going to, over 20 are going to become conforming, or would become conforming with this change.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi, how are you? It's probably no surprise that I'm going to, indicate my discomfort with the commercial overlay here. I'm actually very familiar with this area. That is my movie theater. And so this street, Steinway Street, from beginning to end, I've done work on Steinway Street, has over 2 million square feet of retail. They have the local bid. I would be interested to hear, what their issues or concerns are. But at one time, they had concerns about retail attraction. And in fact, that was why I was engaged in working on that project. So, I do have concerns about diluting retail on what is really feels substantively like a residential street. It's very quiet back there. The commercial activity is on Steinway Street, is on the avenues. That is the land use sort of underlying rationale. And so to go, I would really need to be convinced that retail or commercial on 38th Street, this strip of 38th Street makes sense. The residential I understand, and I'd love to see more units. I also don't see why, we would be replacing potential ground floor units, which are very common on all of these streets, with retail that might, again, dilute what we have on the other streets. So, that's just something I'd like more information about and maybe a little bit more rationale, or if you have some insight on that now, I'd be happy to hear.
Okay. Definitely we'll get back to you on that, and as we discuss more with the applicant and see what their goals are in including commercial use, exactly what sort of commercial use maybe they're proposing, or,
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions? The one thing that I would ask of the applicant, it strikes me that there is quite a lot of parking, more spaces than there are units, and would be interested in knowing how much parking is required and what's the maximum that's permissible. And with that, the application is certified.
Okay. We will go back to item number 3 on page 89.
Actually, to avoid having Raj get up and back and forth, could we continue?
Yeah, we can. The only thing is yes, we can. He's got 2 more to go. But okay, moving on to the 5th item on the agenda, page 131, certification of a zoning map and zoning text amendments and special permit in Queens Community District 1. Our presenter is again Joy Chen. There we go.
All right, good afternoon, commissioners again. This is a private zoning application. We're moving westward and northward into Astoria toward the waterfront area on Vernon Boulevard and Broadway. This is an application by Sipico Construction, Inc., the owner of the project area, which proposes the following actions: a zoning map amendment to change an existing R5 zoning district mapped on Block 315 on Vernon Boulevard to R6B and R7X zoning districts with a C13 commercial overlay. Second action is a zoning text amendment to designate this area as a mandatory inclusionary housing area. And the third, a special permit pursuant to Section 74743 to allow within a large-scale general development the distribution of floor area without regard for zoning lot lines and to modify the minimum base height requirement. These proposed actions would facilitate the development of this entire block into 3 new buildings that you can see in front of you. And these 3 new buildings would have a total of 351 dwelling units, including 119 affordable units. This is the aerial context of Vernon Boulevard and Broadway. Here's our development site, Block 315, and rezoning area. This block is bounded by Vernon Boulevard, Broadway, which are wide streets, 33rd Road, 10th Street, and 11th Street. It's in a very mixed-use area along the Astoria waterfront. It's also directly across the street from a cultural institution called the Noguchi Museum, which has an open-air sculpture garden, and across the street from Costco and the Socrates Sculpture Park over here. Zooming in toward the site a little bit more, you'll see that it's bounded by 5 streets. It's an irregularly shaped lot, so it's rectangular at its southern end over here, and it tapers to a point on Vernon Boulevard and Broadway. This zoning here is currently R5, and the proposed zoning change would be from to an R6B district, 100 feet in on the southern portion, and an R7X district on the northern portion of the site with a C13 commercial overlay. The existing land uses in this area of Astoria are mixed. There is that large Costco right across the street, so it's commercial. It's also very residential, both north and a little bit more industrial to the south. You have the high school here, the Long Island City High School on Broadway. In 2010, the Astoria rezoning changed and remapped a lot of these districts from existing R5 districts to contextual districts. It also facilitated and encouraged new residential uses of higher density along Broadway in an R7A district. So a lot of the newer 8 to 20-story buildings along Broadway and north of Broadway in the R7A were as a result of the Astoria rezoning in 2010. And there are other buildings being also changing over from industrial uses to residential uses along Vernon Boulevard. The Vernon Boulevard context is a wide street, and the existing development site is shown here. So the site today, Block 315, is occupied by an existing 1-story warehouse and including parking and storage for construction materials. On the other side of 10th Street, facing southwest, you see the Noguchi Museum. And then here's a view of the development site, again, from the intersection of Vernon Boulevard and 10th Street. The Noguchi Museum sculpture garden is walled in, and it's across the street on 10th Street, facing southwest from the development site. And this is the development site and relationship with the Noguchi Museum. The 11th Street frontage is the backside of this development site, and today it is very industrial in character. It's underutilized, it's used for storage, and you'll see that the east side of 11th Street and the intersection of 33rd Road and 11th Street is, quieter and lower in character and scale. This is the tax map showing Block 315. This entire block is being proposed to be rezoned, the southern half to an R6B zoning district and the northern portion to an R7X zoning district. The existing zoning district here today is an R5, which is limited in terms of the scale and density that it can provide. The R6B allows a maximum FAR of 3.6 using MIH and a base height of 55 feet, and then the
Sorry, correct yourself, the R6B, 2.2?
Oh, sorry, yes, 2.2. And then the R7X allows a maximum FAR of 6.0 and also a maximum building height of 145 feet. This is a zoning change map, so today is in the R5, and that would be the change to an R6B and an R7X district. These proposed actions would facilitate the development of 3 new mixed-use buildings, and the applicant is calling these new buildings Buildings A, B, and C, with a total of 334,000 square feet of floor area. Zoning Lot A is the southern portion, and Zoning Lot B is the northern portion of the site, and the total amount of dwelling units are 351 units with 113 affordable units. This new development would also include 16,500 square feet of publicly accessible landscaped open space and 166 parking spaces and a subsurface garage. Buildings A and B would include residential and community facility uses, and Building C, which is the largest building, and I'll talk through the buildings in more detail in the following slides, would include both residential, commercial, as well as community facility use. The proposed actions and the general large-scale development would facilitate a site plan that is respectful of the neighborhood's context, as well as allowing for adequate light and air, and it takes into account the feedback that was received from the Noguchi Museum about scale and density, as well as from the local residents and Community Board 1. The southern portion, which is being proposed to be rezoned to an R6B district, would have the lower portion of Building A, which is a 5-story building. It would step up to a T-shaped building, which is Building B in the middle, which would have segments ranging from 5 stories to 9 stories. And then Building C, which is the northern end at the R7X district, would have portions from 9, 10, 11, up to 14 stories for the highest part of the building. This illustrates the site plan of the general large-scale development. You have Building A here, Building B in the middle, the T-shaped building, and then the highest building, Building C, with community facility, residential, and commercial uses. This site plan was developed so that it could really work within the context of massing the tallest portion of the building closer to Broadway, which is where the higher density buildings are, and then have the lower portions of the building step down and be more respectful of the 2 to 4 story residential buildings to the south, as well as across the street, the Noguchi Museum, wanting to really keep that context lower so that there wouldn't be huge shadows cast by taller buildings. This site plan also allows for the benefit of the creation of new open space areas, including a 16,000 square foot open space area, which would be directly across the street from the Noguchi Museum Garden. It would have new benches and seating, as well as screening all along the edge over here, and include a raised platform that could be used to stage community events and other special events. In addition to this public area, which would be treated as a POPS and also follow all the regulations of a POPS space, the applicants, these 3 building massings would allow the creation of also this open space area, which would access planned retail and commercial uses on the ground floor of Building C. So you would also have plantings in this privately owned open space area, as well as seating for these new retail uses that are being proposed. The public plaza here is would be on the the northern portion, and this kind of zooms in a little closer into that area, showing the different seating options, as well as the entrance and the raised platform. The public open space would be accessible from 33rd Road and 11th Street, and it would allow for passive recreation as well as be a community resource for special events. This is a section showing the public plaza area and the plantings, as well as the conifers that are being proposed on the benches. The rendering of this open space area is shown here. And in summary, this proposed zoning change from an R5 district to a R6B district on the south and an R7X district C13 zoning district to the north would allow for the development of a new, basically transformation of this block, which is underutilized today, into 3 new mixed-use developments with an open space that would really contribute to anchoring and allowing for the development and community access to open space in this section of the waterfront area in Astoria.
Questions? Commissioner Levin.
Joy, who's intended to be using the community facility space? Is all the commercial ground floor retail, or are there other commercial elements in the project?
Yes, all the commercial elements in Building C are being planned, but that would be ground floor retail.
It's all ground floor retail. Okay. And I know the briefing sheet indicates that part of the community facility space in Building C would be for Socrates Sculpture Park, but there's some other community facility components too. Are users of those spaces identified yet?
They are in the process of being identified, but they have spoken to Socrates already, and we're in discussions with them about some of those initial community facility spaces. And they have also talked to Community Board 1, so I think they're trying to work out what would be the best options.
Great. Thank you.
Commissioner Edie.
Just a quick question. The private open space in behind Building C, is that open to other residents as well, or is that just Building C?
Yeah, it would be open to people who visit the retail uses. It would be open to building residents, but they would be closed, at night when the stores close, and it's not going to be open 24 hours for public access. But yeah, if so this area here, building residents would have access to it as well.
For all 3 buildings?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi. One question for clarification. So this is right across from the Costco, right? And also Socrates Sculpture Park, which gets a lot of visitation. So I imagine people are going to be crossing the street. And I do see on the plans there are crossings denoted. How is that something that we will end up seeing, or is that just for the purposes of demonstration?
The drawing out. The actual...
because it's not our jurisdiction. It's DOT, but they're shown here, and it makes a lot of sense. But how realistic is it to assume that we would get crossings at what I imagine is a place where you need them?
Yeah.
Because there's no light. There is a light there, actually, now that I think about it, right? Maybe refresh my memory.
Yeah, I will look into that and see what how they'll actually build that out. But what is shown is what they're proposing in terms of access and entrances and exits to the different portions of the building.
Street crossing. I think there is a light there now that I think about it, so it makes sense. Okay. Thank you.
We can also flag it for DOT, obviously.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions? Actually, George, do you have any information about their outreach to the Noguchi Museum?
Well, most recently, I'm not sure when was their last meeting, but they have met with multiple times in the past.
Any sense of the nature of the discussions?
They've been very productive. I mean, in the past, because they helped us reach where we are today with the site plan, and they are continuing to be a strong player as we move forward with this project, and we're supportive of it.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I just want to add 2 points. First, as Joy mentioned, there's a lot of negotiation with the Noguchi at the early stages of this project to mask the building away from views inside the sculpture garden. And that also related, they're thinking now there's a good relationship between this open space that's proposed here and the sculpture garden itself. And they're also really pleased with the ground floor retail that's proposed on Vernon Boulevard. They see that as an opportunity, particularly for programming for food and beverage, which is really scarce here for visitors to the Noguchi, to Socrates, and obviously for residents in the building.
Thank you. So the application is certified.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We will do the 6th item on the agenda. Page 156, it is a pre-hearing review of a zoning map amendment in Queens Community District 6. Our presenter is Nolan Gray.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Today I'll be talking about 76 Drive and Austin Street. This is a private application from Able Orthopedic and Sports Medicine requesting a zoning map amendment from R2 to R32 to facilitate the expansion of 2 legally non-conforming medical offices on Forest Hills, Queens, Community Board 6. Excuse me. So the project is located in a subsection of Forest Hills known as Q Forest, along the border between Forest Hills and Kew Gardens, just to the northwest of the Jackie Robinson Expressway and between the Long Island Railroad Main Line and Queens Boulevard. The project is situated in an R2 zone, which was mapped in 2000 as part of the DCP-sponsored Q Forest rezoning. This was a downzoning designed to preserve some of the existing single-family homes along these blocks and restrict future multifamily development primarily. In 2004, the Community Facilities Text Amendment restricted medical offices in R1 and R2 zones, and it's at this point that the existing medical offices on these 2 sites became legally non-conforming. The project abuts an R6 zone to the south, which is characterized predominantly by pre-war multifamily housing, and then 1 block to the north along Queens Boulevard is a C4-2 zone. The project area consists of 2 single-family homes, both owned by the applicant, which each home host a single residential unit and a medical office space. The rezoning area is not coterminous with the project area. It includes a small 5-foot deep portion of house along 76 Drive. That's 11108 76 Drive. And that's to keep the zoning depth consistent with the R6 heading northwest. Here's some images of the project area. The top 2 images show the applicant-owned lots, which again are single-family homes with medical office spaces on the in the basement and on the first floor, respectively. The bottom 2 images, image 3 shows the change in context along Austin Street. Austin Street, a little bit to the northwest, is a major commercial corridor for Forest Hills. But at this portion, it's mostly pre-war multifamily buildings, and you can see the transition zone in image 3. Image 4 is 11108 76 Drive. And this is a small portion of the property that will be rezoned, but there's no additional use or FAR, so there's no potential for redevelopment as part of this rezoning. I asked the applicant whether they've reached out to the owner of this property. They said they've reached out multiple times but haven't heard back. So hopefully that's something they can address tomorrow. The key changes for the rezoning, the residential and community facility FAR will not change. Single-family residential will still be permitted. The key differences are, number 1, that multifamily residential will be permitted, and then most important for our applicant, medical offices will be permitted. And so the applicant intends to use the rezoning to expand the existing medical offices. So on the left, you see 11104 76 Drive. The idea is to expand the medical office, which currently takes up the first floor, to the second and third. And then on the right, 11103 77th Avenue, to expand the medical office, which is currently in the basement, to the first and second and third floors. There's also an existing surface lot, which the commission had questions about and certification, so I'd like to address that Currently, there's a non-conforming surface lot between the two lots, which they share, as well as a rather wide, approximately 20-foot wide curb cut in the middle of the block, inhospitable to pedestrian traffic, which is high in the area. The applicant intends, as part of any redevelopment scenario, to add additional landscaping. So you can see here the existing landscaping is in light green. The proposed landscaping is in dark green. As well as any improvements, they would be required to reduce the width of the curb cut to 12 feet. So to quickly just go through ULURP. On February 11th, this commission certified the application. On March 13th, Community Board 6 held a public hearing and voted to approve the application. And then on April 15th, the Queensborough president issued a recommendation to approve the application. So thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Okay, then we'll see this at the public hearing on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Okay, now we can go back to the third item on the agenda, page 89. This is a certification of a zoning map and zoning text amendments in Queens Community District 8. Our presenter is Scott Solomon.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Queens Community Board 8, the applicant, proposes a zoning map amendment from R2 to R2X for two non-contiguous areas in the Kew Garden Hills neighborhood to facilitate the development or enlargement of larger single-family homes. Like the R2 district, R2X is also a single-family district, but with a more flexible building envelope. The R2X district was established in 1989 by the lower density contextual zoning text amendment. This contextual district includes a set of zoning regulations to permit larger single-family detached homes, including a higher floor area ratio and an increase in lot coverage. In addition, a zoning text amendment is required to enable the rezoning. The project area is located to the northeast of the Kew Gardens interchange, where there are connections to the Grand Central Parkway, where the Grand Central Parkway meets the Van Wyck, and access to Queens Boulevard, Union Turnpike, and the Jackie Robinson Parkway. The surrounding area is predominantly developed with detached, semi-detached, and attached one-family residences and several multifamily buildings spread across several low-density zoning districts. The project area, made up of two sub-areas, A to the north, B to the south, is generally bound by 72nd Avenue to the north, Union Turnpike to the south, Park Drive East to the west, and Main Street and Valley Place to the east. In addition to Flushing Meadows Corona Park, the surrounding area contains, or proximity to the park, contains 4 additional public parks. The project area is also well served by public transit. New York City Transit operates several local express and select bus service lines that run along Main Street and Union Turnpike, both major commercial corridors in the area. Access to the E and F subway lines are available to the southwest of the interchange beyond the boundaries of this map. Just note in this aerial, we are rotating 90 degrees with the park to the west on the top portion of the image. The project area consisting of 378 tax lots and Zone R2 since 1961 are almost exclusively built with single-family detached homes, most built prior to 1961. They were mapped R2 at the time to reflect the existing built environment. R2 districts are limited to single-family detached homes with a maximum FAR, residential FAR of 0.5, community facility FAR of 1.0. Minimum lot width is 40 feet, and a minimum lot size is 3,800 square feet. 30-foot rear yards, 15-foot front yards are required. Side yards must total 13 feet, each of which must be 5 feet. Maximum building height is governed by a sky exposure plane that begins at 25 feet above the ground level. Maximum, one off-street parking space is required per dwelling unit. Although the R2 district provides some flexibility in building larger homes, current residents don't view it as sufficient for larger families. The following 2 slides include 4 photos from within the project area. Photo 1 above reflects homes that were built prior to 61, that one from 1940. And on the right, photo 2 showing an enlarged home that still complies with the existing R2 district. Photo 3 and 4 reflects a similar pattern and demonstrates the grade changes that you will see throughout Kew Garden Hills. It's many hills, as the name suggests. There are lots of buildings that have an appearance of larger beyond the R2 allowances, but they conform. or comply. Actions requested are, again, a zoning map amendment from R2 to R2X and a text amendment to enable that change. Above is the zoning change map. The dotted black lines to the right show the proposed R2X district boundaries that are unchanged from the existing R2 boundaries. There is no specific project to be facilitated by this development, by these actions. The rezoning is intended to provide additional floor area for existing homes and flexibility in the bulk regulations for future new construction, while also maintaining the character of the neighborhood. The community has proposed this rezoning because residents feel constrained to fit their relatively large families and homes built per R2 bulk regulations. This is a community-initiated and community-led proposal. The proposed R2X district maintains the 15-foot minimum front yard, community facility FAR limitations, and off-street parking requirements. Use groups will continue to be limited to single-family detached homes and community facilities. What will change are, in the R2X district, it allows a residential FAR of 0.85 with a 20% attic allowance up to 1.02. To total 1.02 FAR. To accommodate this increase and horizontal enlargements that will likely result, minimum rear yard is decreased to 20 feet, and the total side yards will be decreased to 10 feet, with at least 2 feet between on each side yard. Contextual height requirements limit the perimeter wall to 21 feet. Maximum dwelling height is capped at 35 feet. This is a single-family to single-family district rezoning. The general low density of and character of the neighborhood will be retained. The residual 15-foot minimum front yard, contextual height requirements, and an existing rule that requires 8 feet of open space between buildings on adjacent lots will help maintain the existing character of the streetscape. In conclusion, the intent of the lower density contextual rezoning text amendment of 1989 was to allow in R2X districts large single-family detached homes with higher lot coverage as is being proposed here. Several homes in the project area have extensions built prior to 1961 that are extending into the rear yards, including also resulting in FAR noncompliance. The R2X rezoning will increase rear yard compliance from 69% to 94% and will bring FAR compliance from 66% to 100%. Thank you.
Questions? Okay, then the application is certified.
Okay. Moving back onto the agenda, the 7th item is page 187. It's a post-referral review of a minor modification of a previously approved special permit in Manhattan. Do not ask me to say that again. In Manhattan Community District 10. Edwin Marshall is here to present.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. The applicant seeks the approval of a minor modification to a large-scale residential development plan to facilitate 322 units of mixed-income housing. The project site is located within Central Harlem in Manhattan Community District 10. The applicant is a private applicant, Carthage Advisors, and the development site is located at 206 to 254 West 124th Street, comprises 3 tax lots on block 1929, lots 17, 29, and 57. The Ennis Francis LSRD was originally approved by the Commission in 1983, and it comprises 232 units in 3 buildings. In 2010, the Commission approved a minor modification, the first one, to the Ennis Francis LSRD to facilitate the development of 60 affordable housing units on Lot 17. The action before the Commission today would enable the applicant to develop the 322 units of mixed-income housing on Lot 57. The requested action would reduce the LSRD area by removing Lot 17, which is located within an R7A district. R7A districts are contextual districts which allow buildings up to 4 FER within a contextual building envelope. However, contextual building forms are not allowed in large-scale residential development plans, so that's why we're removing Lot 17 and leaving the remaining 2 lots, lots 29 and 57, which are zoned R8. The requested action would also allow the construction of 2 as-of-right buildings within the R8
and would increase the floor area from 282,000 to 400,000, the number of dwelling units, add 7,100 square feet of community facility space, and provide 60 accessory parking spaces. So this image shows the LSRD, and it's Francis LSRD, which is outlined in the red, bounded by 124th Street to the north, Adam Powell Boulevard to the east, and 123rd Street to the south. And again, comprises 3 tax lots, 17, 57, and 29. This image shows the existing built condition of the block and the surrounding neighborhood, which is predominantly residential. The Ennis Francis building fronting on Adam Powell Boulevard is 11 stories. The 8-story building with the affordable housing on 123rd Street. And the development site comprises 2 buildings, which have 3 stories, 72 units. These buildings will be demolished, and these buildings have been vacant since 2015. This image shows the existing built condition along 124th Street. As the commission can see, you can see the 3-story buildings comprising the development site. And again, these buildings are vacant. This shows the north side of 124th Street looking west towards Frederick Douglass Boulevard. You can see that these buildings are the backs of buildings which front on 125th Street. This image shows looking south from 125th Street, just to give the commission a better idea what's happening on 124th Street, which is here. And basically 4- and 5-story residential buildings. This is the LSRD in here. And these images show the existing built condition along 123rd Street. The LSRD is zoned within 2 zoning districts, R8, which is a height factor district, which allows buildings of 18 to 20 stories with a 6 FAR. And this is the R7A district, which I referred to, which is on lot 17. So in terms of the proposed build program, the buildings on lot 57 would be demolished and redeveloped with the proposed buildings that the applicant seeks to develop. Lot 17 would be removed from the LSRD, and lot 29 would remain. So the LSRD would comprise lot 57 and lot 29. This image shows sort of like a before and after. This shows the existing LSRD with the 3 buildings, and this shows what the LSRD would look like with lot 17 removed. This is the proposed build program. This is a site plan. The proposed build program comprises 2 buildings, Building A and Building B. Building B will be 17 stories and would have 163 units of low-income housing, so it's 100% affordable to families making no more than 80% of AMI. Building B is an 18-story building which would have 159 units. 30 of those units would be for low income, and the remaining would be market rate units. And you can see the open space on the project site. This is the ground floor plan. You can see Building A here, Building E. Building B has a smaller footprint than Building A. That's why Building B is 18 stories. It rises a little higher than Building A. And the ground floor is totally being used for community facility use. And again, 7,100 square feet. This is the building, the project in section, Building A, Building E, 17 stories, 18 stories. Elevations, Building A, Building B, looking along 124th Street, and this is what you see on 123rd Street looking north, Building B, 18 stories, Building A, 17 stories. And this is a rendering, Building A, 17 stories, Building B, 18 stories. So in terms of process, this application was referred out on January 28th to Manhattan Community Board 10 for review. On February 21st, the applicant made a presentation to the Community Board to discuss the proposed build program. And last Thursday, on April 18th, the Land Use Committee had a follow-up discussion with the applicant. Several concerns were raised regarding the demolition of the buildings on the proposed project site. And because of these concerns, the committee did not feel that it could propose or adopt a resolution. I will say that the applicant was there. The applicant has committed to addressing the concerns raised by the community board and by the community regarding the demolition of the 2 vacant buildings that comprise the project site. Also, I want the commission to note that the community board's 60-day period ended on April 6, 2019. Additionally, this morning, we received letters from the applicant from 10 community groups that expressed their support for this project, including Harlem Boys and Girls Club, Harlem Pride, Harlem LGBTQ Center, and Harlem Park to Park. And again, we received those letters this morning. And this last image shows what the LSRD would look like without Lot 17. That concludes my presentation.
Comments from the commission? Vice Chair Knuckles.
Thank you. For the community facility space, Edwin, are there proposed uses?
Yes, Harlem LGBTQ Center will occupy some of that space. They have a commitment from Harlem LGBTQ Center. They hope to also use some of the space for medical office and perhaps a daycare center.
And how much of the community space would the aforementioned group take?
They will take both at grade and below level space, 20,000 square feet. So they'll take most of the ground floor space and some of the space below grade.
Commissioner Edie.
Just quick question regarding the concerns about demolition. What were those concerns?
What's happening is that the applicant has begun interior demolition, removing the old furniture, as well as moving some of the interior walls. As a result of that, dust is put into the air. It's made airborne, and some of the residents have complained that the dust is causing problems for them. Additionally, there have been some issues about some of the construction debris not being removed in a timely way. In response, the applicant has said that they do have a schedule for sweeping the street, 124th Street, as well as removing the construction debris, and they're willing to work with the community board and, in fact, have committed to preparing a protocol and send it to them in writing and walk them through that at their next meeting.
Okay, thank you very much.
Other comments? Okay, then I will ask for an assent by show of hands to send a letter to the Department of Buildings that this is a minor modification to the previously approved special permit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the eighth item on the agenda, page 216, is a pre-hearing review of a special permit in Manhattan Community District 4. Our presenter is Connor Clark.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is a private application by 18th Highline Associates, LLC, which seeks a special permit to build a 180-space attended accessory parking garage at 515 West 18th Street as part of an as-of-right mixed-use development in the West Chelsea neighborhood in Manhattan Community District 4. The application was certified on January 28th and is back for pre-hearing review. I'll take you through an abbreviated version of the presentation, including public review comments. The proposed action would allow for 139 spaces in addition to the as-of-right 36 residential parking spaces and 5 commercial parking spaces in a building with 181 residential dwelling units and 18,000 square feet of commercial use. The development site is located between 10th and 11th Avenues and West 18th and 19th Streets and will consist of 2 residential buildings built on either side of the High Line. Previously on the development site, there was an open public parking lot with 250 spaces on the eastern side of the High Line and a 2-story former factory building that was demolished in the fall of 2017 on the western side. On this map, the development site is outlined in red, and the project area, which encompasses most of the block, is outlined in a dotted line. The project area is located partially in a C62 district on the eastern end of the block and partially in a C63 district on the western end. There is the entrance to the High Line on the south side of West 18th Street, directly across from the proposed building. Immediately to the south of the project area is the development site for a planned mixed-use development at 76 11th Avenue. The Chelsea Piers complex is located across 11th Avenue, for which there is a crossing at 18th Street. The Hudson River Greenway runs along 11th Avenue alongside Chelsea Piers. The nearest subway is the ACE and L on 8th Avenue. The M12 and M14D buses run eastbound along 18th Street, and the M11 runs northbound on 10th Avenue. These photos show the development site as it is currently under construction. These photos show a view of the development site from West 19th Street. Previously on the development site, there was a public parking garage on the eastern side of the High Line. This is the ground floor plan of the building, which includes the garage entrance on one-way eastbound West 18th Street. West 18th Street is 60 feet wide with 2 curbside parking lanes. The 9 existing curb cuts will all be removed, and there will only be the single curb cut for the garage. Entering cars would proceed down the 22-foot wide curb cut to the ramp leading to the garage and the cellar. Cars would then head down the ramp past the 10 reservoir spaces and stop at the bottom where an attendant would be waiting. There would be 44 stackers located in the cellar. Drivers would then proceed to the stairway or elevator to the street. This elevation shows a view of the building facing north from West 18th Street. The High Line runs between the 2 proposed structures with the building entrance proposed beneath the High Line. The garage entrance would be located on the ground floor of the western building on the lower left of this drawing. The developer plans to provide spaces to a certain number of building unit owners as demand warrants, either by selling the space with the unit or separate from the unit, and the remaining spaces would be available on a monthly basis to other local residents. Their intention is to not have any transient users. In addition to the conditions and findings that are included in your briefing packages, the special permit for additional parking spaces requires a residential growth parking study. The applicant completed the study and found that the proposed project has a residential growth parking ratio of 8%. In Community District 4, the maximum permitted percentage of parking spaces to dwelling units is 20%. At the full board meeting of Community Board 4 on March 6th, the board voted to disapprove the special permit with 0 in favor, 38 opposed, and 1 abstaining. They highlighted the impacts on neighborhood character that the 1-to-1 parking ratio of spaces to dwelling units does not reflect car ownership trends. In a letter dated April 15th, 2019, the borough president issued a disapproval with conditions for the application. The conditions include 36 of the parking spaces should be allotted to car share or rental. The applicant should consult with nearby institutions and the community board on parking needs and then rent spaces to them as needed. The applicant should provide affordable bike parking and ensure that it is used. And if the first 2 conditions are not met, the applicant should reduce the number of spaces to 100. Based on this feedback from the borough president, the applicant is considering bringing in local institutional users and car share operator for a portion of the spaces. I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions from the commission? Commissioner Levin.
Yes, I'm wondering if the applicant's plans for this garage have changed, because the statement of finding, and it has to do with who's going to use this garage. The statement of findings says that it is intended to be used only by unit owners of the proposed development. But as you've explained and is repeated in the letter from the applicant, they now don't anticipate having that level of need by building residents and are looking to find other users, but they tell us it wouldn't be transient. Is that?
Yeah, the latter is we exchanged with the applicant. We tried to clarify that statement in the findings about licenses, and they clarified that what I said in my presentation was accurate, that they intend a portion of the spaces to be used by residents, and then the rest will be used by local residents, and they're hoping to do it on a monthly basis so that it's not transient users.
So, I mean, is the basic idea, they've already built this space, right? Because they had to do the brownfields cleanup. They've got a big hole in the ground. Well,
they've done the excavation.
I mean, and the building is under construction.
Yeah.
Right? So the space to be occupied by the garage exists already. And is their proposed number of spaces really just what can fit in the existing space? Is that how they've
I'm not sure about that.
This plan?
But I mean, as they've indicated in their letter, that they believe that because of the floodplain elevation, that this is really the only viable use for the space. That's what they're saying. So,
yeah. So I mean, we need to have a conversation about the residential use that is really needed in the area. but that information is helpful clarification. The building that's now going up on the south side of 18th Street, immediately across 18th Street from this building, will it have a parking garage, and is that subject to a special permit?
They got a special permit, but it's expired. So I believe they're going to be providing as of right parking.
So, and how many spaces is that? Do you know off the top of your head?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Is it pretty large?
Okay, 50.
50 spaces as of right. And is that in space that could physically accommodate, have they already built a larger garage? And they're just agreeing to only
On the south side?
On the south side.
I don't know.
Yeah, okay. And I ask only because that just goes to predictions of congestion in the area.
I can find out about that.
And similarly to what is expected parking for new buildings, for new construction in the area.
Right.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi. I note that the community board raised concerns about that, particularly given proximity to the High Line. And it would be helpful to get some feedback from the applicant on, the degree to which this we will in fact see conflict, or what they think the conflict might or might not be, because I imagine that's an issue. I know the space, as the Commissioner Levin indicated, is there, but we can still control for the degree to which cars come in and out of that spot. I mean, especially if there are lots of pedestrians walking on the sidewalk.
They did do pedestrian counts. They couldn't do it on 18th Street because of the construction, but they did do counts on 20th Street. And I believe they counted 250 in an hour, which they say is low, but our people say is actually fairly high. And
it's only going to increase given the development in that area. So, I mean, that is a concern for me with respect to the findings. And are they, you mentioned in response to the borough president's comments, they were looking at more car share.
Right.
Car share is used more frequently than, an individual automobile. So does the EIS take that into account? Are we going to be seeing more cars coming in and out because there's car share? I'm very in favor of car share, but, these are considerations.
Yeah, I mean, there's that element, and then there's also the institutional users in the neighborhood, which Community Board 4, or the borough president was really referring to NYPD and DEA facilities, possibly using the parking lot as well. So they said they're willing to work with them, so.
But it's not clear that the agencies are looking for shared facilities.
No, it's a suggestion.
And then another thought on the bike parking. What is their response to the request for more bike parking? I mean, we've heard and we've seen in other applications that, even what a parking operator considers low cost is often a little too high for folks who have other options for parking their bikes.
Well, they've said that they're committed to maintaining the affordability of bike parking on site in consultation with the community board. So.
Okay, if we could get some feedback on what they consider affordable. I mean, I think given its proximity to Hudson River Park, it would be wise to have bike parking here. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, we'll see this at the public hearing on Wednesday.
Okay, moving on to the 9th item on our agenda. It's a city council scope determination for 1640 Flatbush Avenue. The city council proposes to modify the zoning text amendment to eliminate option 2 and replace it with MAH option 1. Staff believes that this modification is within scope.
And so I would ask for an assent by show of hands to send such a letter to the City Council. Thank you.
Okay. Future votes for April 24th. Staff have prepared reports on the following. Brook 156, 2 Howard Avenue. Commissioner Ramprashad is recused on that. The East Harlem neighborhood rezoning follow-up actions. You have any further questions on that? Okay. Manna Products. Also scheduled for decision are 563 Tot Hill Road, 57 St. James Place, 27 Emerson Avenue, and 146 Sinclair Avenue in Staten Island. For post-hearing follow-up, we have the JFK North site. I believe there was a letter in your package. It addressed everything. I'm seeing nods, that's great. The Manhattanville Factory District Walkway and the Court Square Block 3 text amendment. And there was also a letter in your package on that item, I believe. Okay. Any?
Thank you.
Yep.
On Court Square, we had asked for some follow-up images, massing diagrams, and those are very helpful. So thank you to the applicant for getting them done.
Good. All right. I believe that this will conclude the review session for April 22nd, 2019. The time is 3:01 p.m. I am really I predicted 3 o'clock.